Hi, so you've probably read the title, and I have a little bit of explaining to do. This is more of explaining why I think MLP slash My Little Ponies appealed to adults, and particularly I'm talking about the early 2000s version, or I guess technically it's now mid 2000s. And this is more of just like a quick synopsis of the franchise and kind of why I think Gen 4 in particular appealed to an adult audience. Now, I should clarify before I begin, I've actually done a lot of video watching of why people believe that it personally appealed to an adult audience. I don't believe I agree with a lot of the opinions with the 4chan and sort of the background of like these edgy bronies that were like, oh, this is a series we're gonna take over, it's for little kids, we're gonna make it cool. I personally actually don't think it's that way, and just hear me out. This is my headcanon slash hypothesis from kind of watching the show when I was a kid. I'm just going to begin with the quick synopsis of the franchise. I'm pretty sure we're all pretty aware of the Monopoly franchise that is MLP, and also the issues that arrive when talking about said franchise. Yes, I will be referencing episodes without explanation of the full situation of each episode. This video is mainly to explain said title or of said video, so you're not going to get me completely explaining something within the context, I guess is a great way to put it. It's more of if you're kind of familiar, I'm just giving like a brief explanation. So the first thing I always like to do is, where did My Little Ponies begin? My Little Ponies has adapted through the years. It actually began in 1981. The beginning it was a toy line, and then it saw its first film adaptation in 1986. After this, it's kind of a tales of up and down. And well, honestly, I would like to skip ahead to the early 2000s when Hasbro decided to give us something new. Now, I do have a comment to make. We did go from Gen 3, which was more of a clunky design, and from Gen 3 to Gen 4. Gen 4 was like a sleek, hyper stylized, and altogether a really new original design. So I kind of want to set the mood. 2010s, you're sitting there on your couch, Reese's Puffs in hand, chocolate milk in the other, and then you hear this come onto the TV. It's magic with me. Big adventure. There's no way that this wasn't going to become a success. It took the old sort of opinion that had been stated for My Little Ponies and flipped it on its head. By now you're asking, why and how could a TV show meant for children attract such an older audience, and why would it? It's pretty simple. The reason the show was so popular is the main 6 ponies. Personally, I feel like it's the main 6 characters composition. Well, I don't know how to best explain, so I'll dissect the characters with you. We're going to be going in this order as the explanation follows. So you have 1 Rainbow Dash, 2 Rarity, 3 Applejack, 4 Pinkie Pie, 5 Fluttershy, and 6 Twilight Sparkle. I kind of put them out of order, or just kind of in random selection. There's no preference here, I promise. Don't skewer me. Now, the biggest question is why did it attract bronies, or why did these magical female ponies appeal to an older male audience? Well, adult issues. As in, these ponies have real adult problems. And I personally believe that these magical ponies appeal to an older audience for a reason. They were not written for children's TV show. And the only way I can describe that is some of these ideas that they have in the TV show, I feel like could really be more of adult concepts that you deal with when you're older. And I guess the best way to explain this is, it's the reason why I never assumed any of these ponies were actually around the ages in which they clarify later through things like Equestria High. I always thought they were like 20 to 30 years old, even as a kid. But the main reason, none of these ponies suffer from common child slash young adult issues. We're talking 13 to 18 year old issues. I'll be generous and say 13 to 16. So none of these ponies really suffer from common child slash young adult issues that are typically covered in TV shows. These are issues that I would say 13 to 18, but I'll just say 13 to 16 because I feel like 18 is still technically a child. One of the biggest issues I've noticed a lot of TV shows for young kids slash young adults is along this kind of list, which is not knowing where you stand in the world, not having an identity or understanding who or what you want to be, feeling insecure about your body. Nothing for the most part in these characters is child-coded. They literally rent slash own their own homes, live alone, and pay their own taxes, and food. They have hobbies, jobs, and even do daily tasks for their everyday lives. So this is part of the reason why I believe that this series actually blew up was due to the accidentally mature themed content. Characters whose issues were common and in the line with being an adult. I personally feel or believe that this really resonated with older viewers. I do believe that they watched it as a joke. And then after they saw these kind of ponies or anthropomorphic characters kind of stated as more of people rather than, I guess the nicest way to say, objects, which a lot of kid shows tend to do with woman characters, I think it kind of resonated with them with an emotional level that made them connected to the TV show. But I do feel like personally, and this is a critique, I feel like the show failed to understand why these themes attracted the audience and how to properly grow said characters into satisfactory character arcs. The show, in my personal opinion, suffered from a lack of care and understanding of these characters and why they worked. Instead of following the natural progression of the character and fleshing them out, they kept trying to reset characters, and the growth that they would achieve in some of the cases or episodes would be completely rewritten from season to season, or depending on how they felt, episode to episode. The staff did not understand that they were trying to dumb down characters or change them to reflect a child's show, when they were never suited for a child's show to begin with. Hence the reason why I assumed as a kid that these ponies / characters were never children to begin with. Now I'm going to go over each character's kind of complex or dilemma, or how I feel like it kind of shows what age they're kind of suffering through and what they're going through at this time. So I'm going to kind of start with the first one, which is Rainbow. So the first one is Rainbow. And Rainbow is not a very complex character at first. She's bold and brash and has a tomboy charm. But when the series goes on, you see more of a complex written character. You learn quickly that she is lazy and naturally talented. Typically, they show she's naturally talented at one thing in particular, which is flying. She takes things for granted and doesn't apply herself well. But this is where the adult problem comes in. If it was a young kid show, it would show that she has to achieve this, but they kind of show that she's not in school anymore, but she also is not in the academy, which the academy looks like it's something you test out for, more of like a college. You have to get good grades to pass, and it's something you actually have to put effort in. It isn't forced education. And this is where I feel like it really harkens to that adult problem. She never applied herself to her craft, so she thought that she could make it as a Wonderbolt by pure talent alone. When Twilight meets her, she is quick to prove herself and brags about joining the Wonderbolts, which is like, in this world, it's an elite group of flyers that's considered like the best of the best. They like work for the queen. And she has clear goals, but fears that applying herself will lead to failure and uncertainty is why she never takes that opportunity. And she believes that pure talent and no application is needed. They show later on that she has tried to study in the past and has failed to retain any of the required knowledge. Feeling the burn from past failures / being afraid to aim for a dream you are not sure is or of achieving is typically a young adult issue. And the reason why I say that is typically children / teenagers are the ones who experience said failure, not typically kids, I guess is a way to put it. Like, kids and teenagers experience that failure that leads them as an adult having that a fear of not being good enough. But in this series, they show clearly that Rainbow lives on her own. She has a job, speaks about the Wonderbolts, and herself like somebody who has put their dreams on the back burner, which is the biggest issue I have, is the way she talks about it. It's alluding that this is something that, kind of like that person you meet that's like, oh, when I start a rap career, when I become a DJ, and they're typically, I would say, about 20 to 27, they haven't really started their life because they're not really sure they know how. And later on, she does start to realize that if you don't pursue a dream, then it will never be real. She is lost in a daydream, or she has her head in the clouds. At some point, fear of failure overrides her to the point of immobilization, hence the tryouts. She completely freezes. I feel that she has the most debatable age range out of the main group due to her immaturity, but also confidence and lifestyle. She clearly knows her style, personal taste, which can take some time to understand as a young adult. So yeah, I would say anywhere from 20 to 27 in age. Now, I do have to clarify, I do have a lot of personal takes on the show, so if I miss anything, I may come back later, but we're going to move on to the second pony. Okay, the second pony for me that I find probably the most interesting is Rarity. She has an intriguing case of issues, but they are more akin to adult problems, or issues you don't have till later on. Rarity is somebody in My Little Pony who owns a store, has a career, and lives alone with her pet. When you meet her in the series, she's again has very clear likes and dislikes. And she's also applied herself in life. When I say likes and dislikes, I mean not ones that are like, how to explain, teenager based, typically teenagers. I know when I was a preteen, I had major issues with kind of going with the flow of what I liked or I didn't like. I wasn't set in any which way. I was influenced easily. And nobody else is quite like her in the series, which to me just completely reads as somebody who has their mind, determination, and set up. And they show very clearly she has applied herself in life. She has everything she wants on the surface. She's successful, but she doesn't feel fulfilled in life. Now, the reason I mention her age first is this strikes me as kind of, how do I explain, kind of like a midlife crisis pony. Her age has always struck me around like 30 to 35, where you start to question if you really, like around that age, you really question if you really pursued the things you wanted, met the people who you wanted to meet. She owns her own business that she has built from the ground up. Multiple times she's shown to try and pursue a relationship and is immediately shut down. The only attention she receives typically is from younger male affection, and all the affection she does receive is merely appearance-based. She has everything, but not what she really wants. She wants a life worth meaning, a relationship, a new job, making customized dresses for royalty. She is pursuing a desire of wanting to be special. She's already built herself up to the point. She's built it up where she's notable. She has her dream technically, but she kind of doesn't have that dream. And this desire for specialness is kind of what it explains in one episode with her beef with Fluttershy when Photo Finish takes her above Rarity. Rarity also has, well, I'm going back to the midlife crisis. She wants to be special. Back to the midlife crisis issue. She wants to be special. And in fact, they show in one of the episodes, this desire to be special can override her desires to help her friends. When she gets magical wings during Rainbow's tryout, she immediately forgets her promise and starts to outdo Rainbow, knowing full well that this could lead to Rainbow getting recognition. She needs to be noticed by the Wonderbolts. So this kind of ends, I guess, Rarity as a character for me, but I do have some more comments to make personally. I just feel like her interactions with all the characters and how I don't know, to me she just comes off. We're moving on to Applejack. Now, Applejack's kind of a hard character for me because a lot of people say like she's the best or she is the worst pony. I don't really have a notion either way personally. I think she's an interesting character, but I'll kind of explain why I feel like she is experiencing, I guess, older issues rather than like 16 to 18 years old. She could be, but like I just have my personal opinion and I'm gonna kind of explain why that is. So with Applejack, it's a little hard to see her issues at first. She comes off as stable, hardworking, but once the story continues, you can see her issues shine through. She sacrificed her life to take care of the farm. To make ends meet, she constantly has to put work above her own needs and wants. She takes care of her little sister and then has to manage a full-time business and on the side watch her grandmother, or as they call her, Granny Apple. This is typically an issue we don't see most children/teenagers having to deal with. That doesn't mean it doesn't exist. So this is where this pony's main issue comes into play. Does she have issues sharing or just feeling awkward in general? No, her issue is working and burnout. She's always on the grind and never making time for herself. She has no self-focus and diminishes her needs, no self-love or compassion for herself, which is why she's such an opposing character to Rarity, who is completely self-focused. This makes it so she has a hard time having compassion for the other characters around her and their issues. She would rather suffer than admit she needs help. She is jaded, and this is where I assume that she is older. Jaded or being jaded is not a trait we see in a young starry-eyed characters who have like, I'll get over just this hill, I will make it over just this mountain. It comes with time and lessons that are repeated over and over again. If you don't, no one else will. This is what makes her stubborn. She can only trust her insight. It makes her self-righteous in this self-sacrifice. The stubbornness is what leads her, and stubborn in her opinions. If she doesn't stand, who will? This reads as someone who has accepted life and is no longer bright-eyed for her circumstances. I'm sorry, this reads around ages typically 25, 26 to 31. Typically, most characters who are in this sort of predicament are like, oh, there's something around the mountain. There's something I can, get away from. But she is digging a ditch in which she is going to stay in. And she is never going to leave. Okay, now we are moving on to Pinkie. Now, I am not calling them Pinkie Pie, and I did call Rainbow Dash Rainbow, so I'm just kind of going by their first kind of name. Rarity doesn't really have a second. Now, you guys are going to probably hate me for this, but I consider Pinkie the most flawed character within the show. Okay, sorry, I mean out of the main 6. By flawed, I don't mean character design or even personality. Pinkie's issues come from a lack of personality and character growth. There, I said it. I personally think Pinkie Pie is one of the worst characters when it comes to overall personality, and I'll explain why, and it's mainly how she's handled. I really think she's cute. She's one of my favorite ponies out of the main 6. I like Rarity, I like her, and I do love Fluttershy's arc, and I like all of them, but Pinkie's up there. Pinkie is shown to be a party planner, but she only does local events and personal parties. At the beginning, she's shown to be living/renting. Her current living quarters are on the top of a place that she works at. To me, she always gave the youngest vibes out of the main 6. She seems that she is just starting her journey on life and just really starting to pursue her dreams. She feels like a bright-eyed, ambitious, I'm going to give it like a lower ranking here, about 17 to 20-year-old. I personally would say 18, but we'll just include 17, who just moved out and started life. So what's her issue? Pinkie is the youngest, so she is shown to be irresponsible and vapid in thought. I personally don't believe that this comes from anything else other than her issue to avoid real problems. I have beef with Pinkie because she is strangely enough controlling. She has a certain narrative that everyone must follow or she will completely lose herself. Now, I will also talk about how I should state I don't like some of the lessons that they have in the TV show of itself from some of the episodes where I feel like they are encouraging not the best thought process for children. I'll kind of explain that after this example, but my first example is within the same episode, so it'll kind of work out. Examples. So she meets a donkey who she can't befriend, and instead of accepting that maybe not everybody wants to be friends, she steals his stuff, contacts someone who's a very personal old love of his, and tells him his feelings without his consent. If this were any other show, Pinkie would be the main villain. And I also think that because, and I'll be honest here, the donkey isn't a very nice character, I feel like they should have let Pinkie understand that not everybody needs to be your friend. You need to be polite and respectful even if you don't want to. And also that sometimes people are just not the nicest, and that is okay. Now, this issue for lack of control proceeds into another episode, where everyone has been partying with her throughout the week. The party ends and Pinkie invites everyone to another party. They all decline. She then goes about the next week harassing them to have a party. I should explain, but the party is not like a hangout session where everybody gets to pick an activity and food or location. Pinkie parties consist of her deciding the schedule, the activities, the picking out of the food. It's kind of, I guess the best way to describe it is her-centric. She does all the baking, so she puts in all the effort, but it doesn't feel like it's really a group activity. So she's harassing them to go to parties. They all decline again. Instead, she becomes paranoid that her friends are avoiding her. This leads to her replacing them all with inanimate objects and literally creating a fake scenario where she controls the situation. Now, I should add that these examples can go on and on throughout the series with Pinkie as herself. I feel like her character just was reset over and over for more of gags and memes. She was, back in the day, if you had access to a computer in any way, shape, or form, she was probably one of the biggest meme ponies. So I'll just kind of leave it there. I think it was very intentional with them erasing any sort of learning or anything about her. Also, I'll be completely honest here. I've always hated the fact that she came from a rock form. It sounds super petty, but it's never been one of my favorite facts about her as a character. I feel like they really just did that to be contrary. I personally have a lot of opinions about My Little Ponies and the improper handling of this franchise. I do feel like a lot of the things they did were to be contrary on a general whole. I feel like there was a lot of poor writing, and I do feel like it was mainly merch motivated. money motivated. So I feel like they did a lot of things to get attention, make figurines. But anyways, we're going to move on to the next one because I can sit and talk about Hasbro all day. Okay, so this next one is going to be Flutter, or I'm going to call her Flutter for this. So Fluttershy is a hard hitter for me personally because I understand her issues and where they come from. Pretty clearly they show that she's an outcast from Pegasus society. She not only excludes herself from Pegasus's, but also from Ponyville, and in general, pretty much everyone. She avoids talking or interacting due to being bullying/trauma she experienced at a young age. Her only companions are the animals, which is why? Because she can trust them. Her trauma is holding her back from relationships that are meaningful. Lack of trust in society/friends typically is an issue that is developed early in life and typically manifests when the person becomes older. And by that, I mean when they have a choice to. You can be an outcast within high school or anything of that kind, but the way that they show her being an outcast is a very different experience than a teenager with a teenager or young adult. And by young adult, I do mean, oh gosh, I guess like 20 to 20. So anyways, I guess a teenager is what I'll stick to the ages of 18. You are forced to interact. She's able to live by her profession, afford a house or a place to live in, and has distanced herself from her family. And that's like the biggest thing I feel like they do not show is most people who are older who get that choice to distance themselves from the family doesn't happen till like their later 20s to early 30s. This is something people can like establish for themselves typically around that age. Also, the reason I think she's older than Dash is the fact that she literally looks older than the rest of the kids. And I feel like it would be really and like very in character for her to have like failed flying several times, or like maybe for Pegasuses to have a general flying course that they take around an age, but like she pushed it off for like 5 to 4 years of her life, which if Dash is like 25, she'd be like 29, which I feel like is actually really like would make a lot of sense. With this bullied, repressed side comes a flip side that can be emotionally rash towards others and herself. In one episode, she tries to make friends with a group of animals that have no interest in her. This sudden inability to connect to something that makes her feel safe and normal makes her snap. She takes out her rage on everyone around her and also the things which she professes to love. She has a lot of repressed anger and other emotions. Sadly, the show handles her very poorly. Her, Twilight, and Pinkie suffer from growth issues throughout the season. They constantly go back and forth between these characters. I would say Twilight doesn't suffer as much as Pinkie and Fluttershy. I feel like they really suffer throughout the seasons, particularly with Fluttershy. I feel like, I don't know, she became like a uwu cute character, so they had to keep her that way, when I feel like she's just not a very nice pony to begin with, and they show that multiple times throughout, that she has a very hard time setting boundaries appropriately and maintaining friendships. I mean, the first time Twilight ever sees her, she completely ignores her and talks to Spike instead, showing that she's kind of a little bit rude, but okay, the last one is Twilight. And I'm gonna say it this way, when I was first watching My Little Ponies, Twilight was a very interesting character who was one of the most refreshing changes from the traditional formula of the MLP franchise. But sadly, I'm not going to talk too much about how Hasbro has decided not to properly develop this character in the slightest and decided that a competent, over-logical Twilight and this slightly insane Twilight should be turned into cutesy, very, very, very generic Twilight. Twilight was one of the best characters of the show because of her main character problem, antisocial and ambitious, which doesn't really necessarily come with an age limit, but it also doesn't magically go away. Twilight is shown in the show that she has worked at great length to be where she is. Celestia's student. Celestia is pretty much like a god in this universe. To be Celestia's student, you have to not only be talented, but you also have to apply yourself constantly. She could never be a teen in a MLP universe just because it contradicts the overall narrative. Twilight has always made me think, and by I mean overall narrative, it kind of is like she has studied her whole life to be there at that point. If she was in high school and had to go to college or like pony college, I don't feel like it makes any sense. Their cutie marks are supposed to kind of be what you're supposed to know. Some kids know in high school, but a good chunk of people kind of figure that out when they're a young adult to like 20 to 30, sometimes up to 35. I feel like cutie marks should come later on in life and not when you're like a 7-year-old child. Could you imagine if you wanted to be a fireman and then discovered like a fear of heights or like a fear of smoke when you're like older? It seems like a really bad idea. I think turning this show into a young adult show, like I guess the way I could put it is the Cutie Mark Crusaders, turning them into an entirely different show where they're trying to find their purpose and their way in the world would be much more appealing for a young adult audience. And I feel like people who are 20 to like 35 years old who have houses and pay taxes and have to fight elements of literal chaos than finding your purpose. I know that most people or most kids love seeing that kind of stuff, but when you put in there a pony literally is getting rejected by everybody she meets because she wants to date them, but they're never interested in her and she can't make relationships work. And she has comments like she's old. You're going to get a very certain set of audience. But anyways, back to Twilight. Twilight has always made me think that she was around typically the age of 19 to 24. The reason, plus the issues she suffers from, is a much like more adult problem. It's not typically something that you experience while you're in that burn cycle. If you're somebody who's trying to be competitive in school, get those good grades, you don't typically realize you have no friends. She was ambitious, she made her identity school, she left everything behind to prove her point, friends, hobbies, until her studying became her personality. This story was supposed to be she followed the guided plan, got her education, has an owl, oh wait, no, has got the education, has a house now, and now what? Unlike most people, unlike most people, does have a literal deity tell her to go outside and touch grass. But this is a very real problem that a lot of young adults face. They follow instructions that everyone tells them, and then one day those instructions stop coming. This is an issue that plagues ambitious mindsets and can have this is a serious issue that plagues ambitious mindsets and can have serious repercussions later in life, which she never had to suffer from until later in the series. But that's kind of my reason of why the MLP franchise on accident appealed to adults. It was the promise that even if you grow up and grow apart, that you may have a second chance to meet a whole different friend group. People who are different from yourself. Because at the end of the day, Twilight moves to a new place, Ponyville, meets a group of people who all begin to enjoy each other without there really being a common denominator like school or even college. My Little Ponies Gen 4 was a promise to young adults and mid-20-somethings that you could find a friendship outside the forced perspective, that you could overcome your fears of failure, loneliness, and find people you could depend on. P.S. If you guys ever want me to cover how and why Twilight became the Princess of Bland, let me know. And for now, bye.